They say the desert is lifeless, that beyond the heat and wind, it offers nothing, just dust, silence, and death. But those who have truly listened to the desert know better, because sometimes when the wind changes direction, it carries voices, whispers, not from the living, but from something older, something buried beneath the sand long before men ever learned to build cities or write books. And there, hidden among the endless dunes of the Saharan desert, lies a place no map dares mark, a place feared even by those who call the desert their home. They speak of it only in riddles and hushed tones. The Whispering Dune, they call it, not because of the wind, but because of the warnings. Warnings that sound like voices, like prayers recited backward. But the story I'm telling you isn't one of folklore alone. This isn't some ancient legend passed down for generations. No, this story happened recently to people like you and me. Smart people, educated, skeptical. And that's exactly why they never stood a chance. It began with a flower. Not just any flower, but Zahrat Al-Sirr, the secret bloom. A crimson-petaled miracle said to rise from the sands once every 100 years, only under a blood moon. The locals say it's a sacred offering to the jinn. Others say it's bait, a trap laid by the unseen ones who roam between the worlds. Either way, it's real. I know, because one man survived, and he told me everything. His name was Dr. Elias Wren, a desert botanist, half explorer, half researcher, the kind of man who reads forgotten texts and then risks his life to prove them true. He'd heard of Zahrat Al-Sirr during a research stint in Morocco. At first, it was just a curiosity, a myth to file away. But curiosity became obsession. When Elias learned of a rare celestial alignment, a lunar eclipse that would stain the full moon crimson, he believed it was the sign. The bloom was coming, and he was determined to witness it. He wasn't alone. He assembled a small team. Layla Al-Faris, an expert in Middle Eastern folklore and ancient languages. David Klein, a geologist with a knack for satellite mapping and underground imaging. Sana Varma, a survivalist and field medic, cautious, grounded, and the only one who truly feared what they were chasing. They chartered a supply vehicle in Marrakesh, hired a reluctant Bedouin guide, and set out. Their destination? Coordinates pulled from a crumbling parchment found in a forgotten mosque. It pointed to a location deep within the Saharan. No roads, no paths, only shifting dunes and endless heat. The first 2 days were uneventful. Hot, yes. Grueling, absolutely. But silent. Too silent. No birds overhead. No scorpions underfoot. Not even tracks from jackals or beetles. Sana was the first to mention it. It's unnatural, she whispered on the second night, staring into the dying embers of the fire. Deserts have life. This one's watching. David laughed it off. Layla tightened her scarf and turned up the volume on her recorder. Elias just smiled, as if the silence proved they were close. By the third day, the terrain changed. The sand became finer, the wind sharper. Every dune looked like the last, except for one, taller than the rest, like a sentinel. That was the Whispering Dune, though no one called it that aloud. Not yet. As they approached, the guide stopped, said nothing. He just looked at Elias and shook his head. Then, without waiting for argument or payment, he turned and vanished into the sands, walking faster than a man his age should have been able to. They were alone. Elias, of course, was thrilled. He insisted on setting up camp at the base of the dune. They pitched 2 tents and staked a satellite dish for signal. But it didn't work. None of their equipment did. Radios buzzed with static. The GPS spun in circles. Even their compasses began to twitch, as if unsure which way was north. That night, the wind picked up. It didn't sound like wind. It had rhythm, cadence, almost syllables. Sanaa swore she heard her name in the gusts. Layla woke in a panic, claiming something had whispered to her in a language she didn't know. And she knew 7. But Elias wouldn't be deterred. He believed they had found the right place at the right time. The blood moon would rise in 2 nights. All they had to do was wait. And so they did. But the dune, it didn't wait. In the morning, they discovered footprints. Not their own. Bare, wide, and deep, as if made by someone walking in a trance. They led away from the camp and then vanished. No return tracks. No disturbance. Just sudden, perfect absence. That night, they heard the singing. No source. No instrument. Just a low, melodic humming that echoed in the sand. Layla tried to record it. The file came out corrupted. Just static and sharp clicking noises, like teeth. Sanaa begged to leave. David argued. Elias insisted on staying. And so they stayed. And in the distance, something bloomed. Not a plant. Not yet. But something bloomed in the air. A smell. Sweet, thick, metallic. Like honey mixed with rust. It coated their throats. It made their eyes water and their thoughts drift. David walked out into the sand that night. He didn't say a word. Just stood barefoot, staring up at the sky until the wind swallowed him. They searched until dawn. Found nothing. Not a footprint. Not a trace. Just the wind. And then the first petal. Crimson. Glossy. Shimmering in the sunrise. Sticking out of the dune like a bloody tongue. Elias wept. Layla screamed. Sanaa whispered a prayer and began digging a grave. Not for David. For all of them. If you've ever burned old parchment, you'll know the way it curls. How the edges blacken and twist like they're alive, trying to crawl away from the flame. That's how this chapter begins. Not in the sand, but far earlier, in a dim archive beneath a forgotten mosque in Fez. Long before the team stood at the edge of the Whispering Dune, the map found them. Elias Wren wasn't the kind of man who believed in curses. Not then, anyway. His obsession with Zahrat Al-Sirr had started like most obsessions do, with a question. How could a flower, spoken of in scattered myths across North Africa, have no modern record? Not even a sketch, a photograph, a sample pressed in a botanical journal. Nothing but legends of red moons, vanishing men, and whispers in the dunes. But the clue that led them into the heart of the Sarin wasn't a flower. It was fire. Elias had traveled to Fez to speak with a retired scholar named Hamid Basri, whose family had guarded a crumbling manuscript collection passed down for centuries. Most of it was poetry, riddles, and religious commentary. But tucked between 2 pages of a scorched volume, bound in cracked black leather, was a slip of treated papyrus. A map, not one drawn with modern tools, but sketched in charcoal and ochre, symbols instead of cities, stars instead of roads. No labels, no compass, only a smear of red ink on one side, and a date written in ancient Maghribi script. When the moon is drowned in blood, seek the dune that sings. Hamid had refused to translate it. Some things were never meant to be found, he said, as he tossed the parchment into the brazier beside them. But Elias moved faster than the flame. He burned his fingertips pulling it free. But the core of the map survived barely. Just enough to give him what he needed. Coordinates. A pattern of constellations. A curse, maybe. But he didn't believe in those. Not yet. Back in the present, at the dune, Elias held that half-burnt map like scripture. He studied it again now, his hands trembling not with fear, but with anticipation. David was gone, swallowed by the sand or something worse. But Elias wouldn't leave. Not when the flower was blooming. Layla was different now. She'd grown quiet, withdrawn. Her notebook, once filled with excited scribbles, now lay abandoned, its pages smeared with crimson fingerprints. Not blood, not ink, something in between. She claimed the flower had spoken to her, not in words, but in visions. She dreamed of an oasis that never existed, of firelight dances around circles of salt, of a woman with no face singing lullabies in a voice that made her teeth ache. She said the bloom wasn't a plant at all, it was a door, and once it opened, the jinn would cross. Sanaa tried to leave the next morning. She packed one water jug, 2 flares, and started walking east, back toward the mountains. She came back at sunset crying, not because she was afraid, but because, as she explained in a broken whisper, there's no east. There's no anything. The sun doesn't rise right. The stars aren't moving. We're not in the same place anymore. The whispering dune wasn't just a dune. It was a place between places, a fold in the desert, a bruise in the fabric of the world. That night, the flower grew. No longer a single petal, but a cluster of buds, pulsing slightly in the moonlight like they had veins, like they were breathing. Layla knelt before it, eyes glassy, lips moving in silent prayer. Elias recorded everything. Notebooks, audio logs, photographs. Though none of the photos came out right. The petals never appeared in the images. The backgrounds blurred. His own reflection warped, and the humming returned. Only now it was closer. It came not from the dunes, but from under them. At 2:07 a.m., the ground beneath their camp shifted. Not a quake, but something else, like the sand was exhaling. Their tents collapsed inward. The satellite dish bent in half. The air turned cold, then blisteringly hot. Layla screamed. They dug through the sand until they found her. Not far from the flower, half buried. Not unconscious, not harmed, but chanting. Words they didn't recognize. Words that made their ears bleed slightly if they listened too long. Sanaa begged Elias again. We're not supposed to be here. We weren't invited. But Elias wouldn't leave. He wasn't afraid of jinn. He didn't believe in spirits. He believed in discovery. He believed in legacy. He would get his proof, even if it meant hell had to open to give it to him. The next evening, as the blood moon began its slow rise over the horizon, they saw it. A figure. Not walking, not floating. Just there, where the dune met the sky. Tall, cloaked in torn linen, face obscured by shadow, yet brighter than the moon behind it. It didn't move. It didn't need to, because when they saw it, their bodies responded. Knees weakening, throats tightening, and that unbearable scent returned. Like decayed roses, warm copper, and childhood nightmares. Layla dropped to her knees again. Sanaa loaded her flare gun. Elias stepped forward, whispering into his recorder. Contact has been made. Visual confirmation of entity. Non-human silhouette. possibly guardian, or the recording cut off. The rest of the night is a blur in the survivor's account. Voices arguing, a scream, a sound like tearing silk mixed with thunder, a blaze of light brighter than fire, and silence. Only Sanaa and Elias remained conscious when the blood moon reached its peak, and by then the flower had fully bloomed. 7 petals, all pulsing, all humming, the same rhythm as a heartbeat. Layla was gone. There were no tracks, no struggle, just her scarf fluttering next to the bloom. And deep below them, in the dune's heart, something began to rise. Something ancient, something promised. By the 3rd night, the desert had lost all familiarity. It no longer felt like a place beneath the sky, but rather a wound in the earth. Something unhealed, something festering. The whispering dune wasn't silent anymore. It spoke, not in language, but in presence. You felt it in your skin, the way you might sense someone staring at you from behind a closed door. Constant, heavy, intimate. And then came the dust. Not like the dust you and I know. This was different. It rose from the ground without wind, thick as ash but colder, dry, yet clinging to the skin. It hung in the air like smoke from a memory. And the most disturbing thing? It didn't cast shadows. When Elias tried to shine a flashlight through it, the beam vanished, like the light itself had been eaten. Sanaa, shaken but still alert, waved her hand through it, and her fingers looked wrong, stretched, disconnected, as if the dust was more than just dust, as if it altered things, or maybe it revealed them. Sanaa believed it was a veil, that the dust wasn't obscuring reality. It was showing what had always been there, hidden behind layers of illusion and ignorance. She started seeing shapes in it, not hallucinations, not faces in the clouds, real shapes, human-sized, watching, sometimes standing just beyond the camp, still as statues, sometimes crawling on the dunes with impossible limbs, disappearing when you blinked. Elias refused to look at them. He buried himself in his notes, in his maps, in the flower. Zahrat Al-Sirr had grown another petal, now 8. The final one, according to legend, would signal the crossing, when the boundary between this world and the next thinned to a whisper. Sanaa confronted him that night. She demanded they destroy the bloom, dig it out, burn it, salt the ground. But Elias had long crossed a line she wouldn't. He looked up at her, pale, gaunt, a hint of fever in his eyes, and said something she never forgot. We're not here to survive. We're here to witness. That was the moment she knew. He was no longer just chasing knowledge. He was worshiping it. The flower had him. Not just his mind, but his will, his essence. It had wrapped around him like ivy, feeding on obsession. That same night, the final petal emerged. 9 total. It shimmered like wet obsidian in the moonlight. And when the night bloomed, the dune shifted again, not in shape, but in feeling. It became hollow, like the sand wasn't solid beneath them anymore, like it was just a surface stretched over a vast, breathing thing. And then they heard it, a low, guttural sound, not a roar, not a voice, but a combination of both. It came from below. It echoed in their bones. Elias dropped to his knees, scribbling wildly in his notebook, mouth agape muttering, "It's opening. It's really opening." But Sanaa knew what was happening. This wasn't a bloom. It was a summons. She grabbed the flare gun, pointed it straight at the flower. But before she could fire, the dust shifted, hard, and something rose from it. It wasn't visible at first, just a shape in the dust. Tall, thin, its edges quivered like heat on asphalt. And then it moved, not walking, not floating, just repositioning itself from one spot to another, without covering the distance in between. No footprints, no sound, and when it looked at Sanaa, she saw nothing where a face should be. Just a pulsing red glow, like a coal behind a veil. The air turned thick, her lungs burned, and the hum returned louder now. A chorus. Dozens, maybe hundreds. She fired. The flare arced through the air, brilliant, red, defiant. It never landed. It simply vanished in midair. Gone. Elias screamed, not in fear, but in rage. "You ruined it," he shouted. "You don't understand what this is. This is history, this is." He didn't finish the sentence, because then the dune split, right beneath the flower. Silently, the sand cracked open like lips parting for a scream. And beneath the darkness, not the absence of light, something alive. A pit, a mouth, a portal, and the flower fell in. Elias dove after it. Sanaa never saw him again. No sound, no struggle, just sand settling into place, like nothing had happened. And the dust lifted, just like that. Gone. The air cleared. The stars returned. And the whispering dune looked ordinary again. Except it wasn't, because now the shadows had changed. Where there had once been two tents, only one remained. Where there had once been 4 souls, only one stood. Sanaa collapsed. She was found 3 days later by a patrol plane, a rare flight path over the Saran. The pilot claimed they saw a figure wandering in a spiral pattern, etching symbols into the sand with a stick. When they brought her in, she said nothing for 12 days. When she finally spoke, her first words were, "Don't let the flower bloom again." The official reports say that only one person returned from the expedition. That only one was found alive. But no one ever tells you what was left behind. You see, there are vanishings, and then there are removals. The kind that don't leave behind footprints or clues. The kind that erase a person, not just from the landscape, but from time, as if the desert itself decided they had no business being remembered. That's what happened to David Klein, the first vanishing. If you remember, David was the geologist, skeptical, practical, a man who trusted readings more than rituals. He wasn't there to find a flower. He was there to debunk it, until he walked into the sand on the second night and didn't come back. There were no calls, no panic. He just stood up from the campfire and walked out into the desert, barefoot, eyes fixed on the sky, his mouth half open like he was mid-sentence with something only he could hear. Sanaa called after him. Elias followed briefly, but the prints, they ended just 20 feet out. Not faded, not covered by wind. Ended, as if he'd stepped off a ledge no one else could see. That's when things shifted, when the desert truly turned against them. It wasn't just the missing person. It was the changes. Small at first, then undeniable. The sand around the dune began forming unnatural patterns, circular ridges, intersecting triangles, symbols that looked almost geometric, until Layla matched them to an ancient script known only from burial rites. Sanaa started noticing duplications. Her own boot prints repeated ahead of her, leading her in circles. Shadows stretched in the wrong direction. Her reflection in her canteen blinked when she didn't. She started sleeping with her back to the dune. And the flower? It grew faster. After David disappeared, Zahrat Al-Sirr sprouted 2 more petals overnight. Elias was ecstatic. He no longer spoke of research or discovery. He spoke of invitation. He believed the flower wasn't merely blooming. It was responding to them, choosing them. He saw David's disappearance not as a loss, but as progress. Sanaa confronted him again. She demanded they record a distress signal and attempt evacuation. Elias laughed. "You think the desert will let us leave?" he said. "We've crossed the veil. There's no returning. Not as we were." And maybe he was right, because that night, the second vanishing occurred. Layla. She'd begun writing in tongues, scratching symbols into her skin with the edge of a cracked mirror. She didn't sleep anymore. Claimed she didn't need to. Said the jinn were keeping her awake, so she could listen. Sanaa tried to help her, but Layla only stared at her with wide, dry eyes and whispered, "The bloom opens inwards." No one understood what that meant, but the next morning, she was gone. Not just her body, all her things. Her notebooks, her scarf, her boots, even her tent. The sand where she had slept was untouched, flat as glass. Sanaa fell to her knees, eyes glazed with exhaustion, dread, and something close to madness. Elias. He stood near the bloom, arms open, eyes closed, whispering words in a language no one taught him. The dune began to hum. Not just the flower, the dune itself. A low vibration in the ground, like an engine rumbling in the earth's belly. The kind of sound that bypasses the ears and settles in the spine. Sanaa tried to record it. Her device exploded in her hand. She wept, not from the burns, but from the confirmation. Something was awake beneath them. That night, she did not sleep. She sat atop a rock, clutching the flare gun, watching Elias. He didn't eat anymore. He didn't blink often. He just circled the flower, like a priest tending to a sacred fire. At one point, he turned to her and said, "There's no vanishing. You need to understand that. They were taken, accepted." And when she asked, "By what?" he smiled. "By those who remember what this world tried to forget." That was the first time Sanaa understood what kind of story she was in. This wasn't about science. It wasn't even about legend. This was a ritual, an offering, and they weren't the seekers. They were the sacrifice. By now, only 2 remained. Elias, consumed, transformed, and Sanaa, the reluctant witness, slowly unraveling at the edges. The whispering dune was no longer a place they had camped. It had become something else entirely. A living altar, a shrine waiting to be fed. And at its heart bloomed the flower. No longer a fragile sprout, no longer a rumor, but real, tall as a child now, with petals so red they seemed to absorb the moonlight. 9 in total, each one pulsing faintly, as if mimicking a heartbeat. Its stem was thick, glistening, too firm to be plant and too slick to be stone. Its roots had emerged through the surface, coiling like veins across the dune's crown, disappearing again beneath the sand like buried serpents. And the smell, it was intoxicating, not floral, not earthy, but ancient. A smell like parchment sealed in a tomb, mingled with fresh blood, and something else. A sweetness that didn't belong in this world. The kind of scent that made your eyes water before your mind even realized why. That night, under the full bloom and a sky smeared with blood moonlight, Elias made his move. He donned a robe. Where it came from, Sanaa never knew, and stood before the bloom with arms stretched wide. He recited words into the wind, not read from a book, but conjured from memory. From where did he learn them? He claimed the flower had taught him. He called it a gatekeeper. Not a creature, not a god, not a relic, but a key. He claimed it opened a doorway to the realm beneath the sand, to those who existed before language, before time, before light. And he wanted in. Sanaa begged him to stop. She didn't care about science anymore, didn't care about proof or credit or history. She just wanted to leave. But Elias had long since crossed over. "You were never meant to understand," he said softly, without malice. "You still think this place is a nightmare. It's not. It's a correction." That's when the bloom began to move. Not sway in the wind, but move. Each petal slowly peeled back, revealing something within. A core. Dark. Wet. Shimmering like obsidian, but not solid. Inside it, shadows swam. Shapes. Images. Flashes of other places. Sandy halls with no end. Staircases curling into blackness. Cities made of bone and gold. And eyes. So many eyes. Watching from the inside of the bloom. Elias stepped forward, barefoot now. The sand didn't seem to touch him. He reached toward the core, and the flower opened completely. The hum became a roar, without sound, like pressure collapsing. Sanaa dropped to the ground, clutching her ears, though there was nothing to hear. Her vision blurred. Her heartbeat skipped and staggered. And then the light came. Not bright, not blinding, but wrong. A shade of red that didn't exist on any spectrum. The kind of color you feel rather than see. A color that left after images in your bones. Elias touched the core and vanished. Not like David, not like Layla. There was no body, no scream, just gone. The flower closed again, petals folding back inward like a completed ritual. The hum softened, and the dune sighed. That's the only word for it. It sighed, like a mouth satisfied after swallowing something warm. Sanaa blacked out. When she woke, it was dawn. The flower had withered, its petals shriveled and blackened like burned silk. Its stem cracked. Its roots, exposed in the sand, had turned to ash. There was no sign of Elias. No sign of the door he claimed to open. Only the whispering wind. And one last symbol, drawn perfectly in the sand beside her. 3 interlocking circles. Not drawn by hand. Not by her. But there. Waiting. And from that moment on, the dune was silent again, as if nothing had ever happened. But Sanaa knew the truth. The bloom had completed its cycle. The offering was accepted. The door had opened. And what crossed over wasn't Elias. If you've ever felt eyes on your back in an empty room, then you already understand what haunted Sanaa after the bloom died. It wasn't noise. It wasn't shadow. It was presence. When she opened her eyes after the bloom withered, the world looked familiar again. The sand looked like sand. The sky, finally, had stars. Her canteen held water. The compass, oddly enough, pointed north once more. But nothing felt right, because something had stayed. Something followed her from that place, not with footsteps or sound, but in silence. Something just behind her vision, always watching, never seen. The flower may have closed, but the veil had been pierced, and on the other side of that breach were the watchers. They had no form, no faces, no names, but they were patient, They didn't walk, crawl, or fly. They existed, in the corner of her reflection, in the echo of her own heartbeat, in dreams that weren't hers. Sanaa tried to leave that place the moment she could stand. No maps, no gear, just herself and a prayer muttered under cracked lips. She walked in a single direction for what felt like days, never sure if she was moving forward or being allowed to. Time didn't pass the way it used to. The sun rose too quickly and sank too slowly. Her shadow split once, briefly, she swore, and followed her from both sides until she collapsed from exhaustion. She dreamt of Elias, but it wasn't him. He had no eyes. He stood in the pit where the flower once bloomed, smiling with jagged teeth and saying things without moving his mouth. Words in reverse. Words she felt more than heard. You were seen. You were marked. You are remembered. She woke screaming, sand in her mouth, blood trickling from her ear. She was not alone. Not then. Not ever again. The watchers were near. She stopped making fires, stopped shouting. Her voice, she believed, would only lead them closer. The only thing she carried now was silence. And the flare gun, the one she had failed to fire at the bloom. The metal was hot even at night. She never questioned it. The first real sign came on the 5th night of her wandering. A footprint, not hers. Bare, deep, wide, just one. Then a line in the sand, stretching in a perfect circle. Then another. She kept walking. She tried to pray, but every time she spoke, her voice came back wrong, echoing ahead of her, not behind, like something was answering before she asked. She began seeing mirages. Only they weren't illusions. They were memories, but not her own. She saw a desert long ago, before the dunes, before the names. A city built from white bones, towers spiraling into the sky, a river of light running through it, and people, if they were people, who floated instead of walked, who bled black smoke, who whispered truths into stones and buried them. In one vision, they knelt around a single flower, the first bloom. Their hands, long jointless, poured something into the roots. A sacrifice. A child. Sanaa screamed when she awoke from that vision, and the watchers were closer. She never saw them, but she knew. In one moment of weakness, she turned to look behind her, and what she saw nearly unmade her. Dozens of shapes, tall and swaying, like fabric caught in slow water. They stood motionless, yet quivered, not from wind, from intent. She didn't run. She knew she wouldn't be chased. That wasn't how they worked. You don't flee the watchers. You carry them. And carry them she did, until the rescue plane finally came. A miracle, they called it. She was found dehydrated, half-conscious, covered in strange ash and symbols traced in her own dried blood. They thought she'd lost her mind. They gave her food, water, a bed. But they didn't understand, because even in the hospital, behind sterile glass and steel, the shadows didn't feel right. The lights flickered in patterns. She heard her name in the hum of the fluorescence. She saw the flower bloom again in the cracks of the ceiling tiles, because the watchers had followed her, and they were patient. The bloom had opened, and it would open again. There's something you should understand about Jinn. They don't give. They trade. Everything they offer comes wrapped in something else, something unseen until it's far too late. And even then, they don't take what you have. They take what you didn't even know was yours. That's what happened to Elias Wren. At least, what remained of him. You remember how he disappeared, touched the bloom and vanished? Well, he came back. Not in body, not in voice, but in traces. It started with recordings. The audio Sanaa had tried to capture during the expedition, files corrupted, full of static, strange reverse humming. After she returned to the city, she handed over her equipment to the authorities. One file survived, and it wasn't just sound. It contained a voice. Elias's voice. Clear, calm, and wrong. The pact is sealed. The flower remembers. The host is open. The scientists said it was a hoax. Digital interference. AI manipulation. But one man in the department quit the next day. Said the voice knew his name, whispered it, in the static between sentences. You see, Elias made a pact with the Watchers. Not for wealth, not for immortality, for knowledge, the ancient kind, the kind that doesn't belong in the human brain, the kind that comes at a price, because knowledge to them is a living thing, not stored in books or data, but in flesh, in blood, in whispers that live under your skin. Elias had been given his prize, but he had become the vessel, and vessels must be used. Sanaa understood this too late. She was living quietly then. A new name. A quiet apartment in Tangier, far from the desert. No interviews, no lectures. Just silence. But the nightmares never stopped. Nor did the marks. She began waking up with strange patterns etched into her arms and back. Tiny grooves, as if something with thin claws had traced them gently in the night. They didn't bleed. They itched, with a heat that pulsed in time with her heart. And then came the voice. Not from outside. Inside. Elias's voice. Soft. Calm. Echoing through her thoughts like a memory long buried. You survived. That was the pact. She tried everything. Exorcisms, isolation, medication. But the voice stayed. Not constant, but patient. It would fall silent for days, only to return in the middle of her breath, speaking in broken riddles and desert dialects no one else remembered. Then one day, her reflection blinked on its own. That was the beginning of the possession, not the kind you see in films. No spinning heads, no demonic snarls, just subtle, terrifying changes. Sanaa stopped feeling hunger, stopped dreaming. She began drawing symbols unconsciously, in her sleep, in her coffee foam, in the frost on the window. The same 3 circles again and again, and she began speaking back to the voice, arguing at first, then pleading, then listening. The Watchers don't force themselves into you. They make space in you, until you invite them. And that's what she did, not because she wanted to, but because she had nowhere left to hide. She spoke aloud to them one night, 3 words, in an ancient tongue that she shouldn't have known. The room turned cold. The lights blew out, and something inside her shifted. From that moment on, the voice was no longer Elias. It was something older, something that didn't speak in words but in understanding, like a thought you inherit, not learn. They showed her the truth of the bloom, that it wasn't a flower, it was a mouth. And every 100 years, it opened to speak and to feed. What Elias had done wasn't unique. He was just the latest in a long line of seekers, scholars, priests, poets, each seduced by knowledge, each consumed. But Sanaa, she was the first to survive. And survival, to them, meant she had value. She became a conduit. Not a prophet, A relay. The pact was now hers, and she was to prepare the next bloom. When people speak of what lies beneath the desert, they imagine bones, buried cities, maybe forgotten tombs. But the truth is far stranger. What lies beneath the whispering dune is not of this earth. Sanaa found that out the night she returned. Not willingly. She hadn't planned the trip, hadn't packed or booked it. One morning, she simply woke up on a train, with a ticket in her hand she didn't remember buying. Destination, Sarin. Even the conductor didn't seem real. He had no face she could recall, only a scent, like burnt paper and dust. And his voice sounded more like pages flipping in a closed room than anything spoken. When the train stopped, she stepped out into nothingness. Not a town, not a station, just sand and silence. She walked. The dune rose in the distance, unchanged, timeless, as though the years hadn't touched it, as though it had been waiting. At the summit, she found it again, the very place it all began. But this time, the bloom was gone. Not dead, just not there. In its place, the sand had hardened, fused into glass, dark, smooth, almost metallic. And in the center of that hardened shell, the crack. Thin, deliberate, a line not made by nature but by design. Sanaa knelt, touched it, and the crack split wide. The sand didn't fall inward. It peeled back, like eyelids opening. What lay beneath wasn't a tunnel, not even a cave. It was a mirror, not a reflective surface, but a mirror in the truest sense. It didn't reflect your appearance. It reflected your truth. As Sanaa looked in, she didn't see herself. She saw them, the watchers. Not in full, of course, just glimpses. Eyes blinking in directions that didn't make sense. Mouth speaking languages that couldn't be spoken. And Elias, floating, still alive, in a way no one should be. He wasn't human anymore. He had learned too much. The mind can't hold infinite knowledge. It begins to bend, then tear. Elias's form flickered in the mirror, shifting between his old body and something else. Something long, robed, faceless. Sanaa tried to step back, but her reflection didn't move. It stared back. Then it spoke. In her voice, "You returned. That was your offering." Her feet froze. Not in fear, in obedience. She was no longer separate from them. She was theirs. The mirror pulsed. A low vibration rose from the sand around her. The dune began to glow, faint lines etched beneath the surface, forming a perfect symbol, the three interlocking circles again. And in that moment she understood. This wasn't the bloom's tomb. It was its womb, a waiting chamber, a cocoon between worlds. The flower was never meant to bloom on the surface. Its true form would rise from within, when the pact-bearer returned and the mirror opened. And so, the cycle prepared to begin again. But this time, the watchers didn't want an audience. They wanted a doorway. They had marked the earth once every century, planting the seed, harvesting the minds. But now, they were ready to step through. Sanaa dropped to her knees. Tears filled her eyes, not from pain, but from clarity. She knew what came next, and she whispered, through trembling lips, "I open the mirror. I receive the bloom. I call what waits." And the glass beneath her feet shattered, without a sound. The official record tells of one survivor. One, Sanaa Varma, recovered in the Sarin Desert, severely dehydrated, unresponsive for 72 hours, found at the foot of a featureless dune that, according to maps, shouldn't exist. When she woke, she didn't speak, not right away. And when she did, she said only this: "The bloom has roots now." No one understood what she meant. They wrote her off as delusional, trauma-induced psychosis, buried her testimony in medical files and security clearance forms. She was quietly relocated, watched, studied. But here's what they didn't report. Sanaa never truly came back. She walked, she talked, she breathed. But something was missing. Or worse, added. People around her grew uneasy. Electronic devices near her malfunctioned. Light bulbs flickered when she passed. Children cried in elevators. Dogs howled at her window at night. And always, the same 3 circles would appear, drawn on her mirror in condensation, traced into her bedsheets, carved faintly into her wooden floorboards. She tried to ignore them, tried to live. But every night, they came back. The watchers, not in physical form, but in impressions, in whispers through walls, in her own handwriting, found on papers she didn't remember writing, in old radio frequencies that seemed to play her thoughts back to her, seconds after she had them. She couldn't hide, because they were inside her, not possessing her, not puppeting her, but linked. She had survived the bloom. She had entered the mirror. She had been seen. And once seen by them, you are never unseen. So she did the only thing left to do. She wrote it all down. Every word. Not for herself. Not even for warning. But for preservation. You see, the watchers don't destroy. They archive. They collect experience like blood in a bowl. Every witness is a scribe. Every survivor becomes a new bloom, waiting to open. Sanaa's notes were found years later, after she vanished from a locked room. The apartment was undisturbed. No signs of forced entry. Just an open notebook on her desk. 9 petals sketched carefully in the corner of the page. And a final sentence. I was the first to survive, but I will not be the last. Deserts have long memories. Longer than oceans. Longer than mountains. Longer than any story we tell ourselves to feel safe. The Saharan Desert is no different. And though the whispering dune lies still today, silent, wind-worn, half forgotten by cartographers and erased from satellite imagery, it remembers, because the bloom remembers, and so it waits. Every 100 years, the cycle returns. And now you understand. It's not the moon that summons the flower. It's us. Our curiosity. Our arrogance. Our unending hunger for the forbidden. Sanaa's disappearance was not the end. Her story, recorded in fragments and whispers, was only a warning, one mostly ignored. The symbols began appearing again. First in sandstorms over Marrakesh, patterns caught briefly in satellite feeds. Then on a child's sketchpad in Algiers, drawings of a red flower with 9 petals and a faceless man beneath it. Then in the humming of old radio towers, turned off decades ago, broadcasting nothing except the sound of wind. Wind that repeats 3 syllables over and over. Zahrat Al-Sirr. The bloom is stirring again, and it doesn't need soil this time. It has roots, in minds, in dreams, in the cracked silence between thoughts. They say a new research team has gone missing in the Saharan. 3 PhD candidates, 1 local translator. Last seen heading into a restricted zone with outdated maps and far too much optimism. No bodies recovered. Only their drone footage remains, static-laced, corrupted, but frame by frame, If you slow it down enough, you can see it. A glimmer on the dune. A shimmer. A petal. Red. Alive. And in one final shot, just before the feed cuts completely, you can see someone standing beside it. A woman. Back turned. Still. Waiting. And though her face is not visible, her shadow is long. And her reflection has 3 eyes. So now you know the truth. The bloom never ends. It sleeps. And when we stop believing, it opens again.